One of your more controversial ideas in mathematics, as laid out in the paper, The Set Theoretic Multiverse, you describe that there may not be one true mathematics, but rather multiple mathematical universes. And forcing is one of the techniques that gets you from one to the other. So
That-
can you explain the whole shebang?
Sure. Let's get into it. So the lesson of Cohen's result and Gödel's result and so on, these producing these alternative set theoretic universes, we've observed that the continuum hypothesis is independent and the axiom of choice is independent of the other axioms. But it's not just those two. We have thousands of independence results. Practically every non-trivial statement of infinite combinatorics is independent of CFC. I mean, this is the fact. It's not universally true. There are some extremely difficult, prominent results where people proved things in CFC. But for the most part, if you ask a non-trivial question about infinite cardinalities, then it's very likely to be independent of CFC. And we have these thousands of arguments, these forcing arguments that are used to establish that. And so how should we take that? I mean, on the one hand, if you have a theory and it doesn't answer any of the questions that you're interested in, okay, so what does that mean? If you're following what I call the universe view or the monist view, you might naturally say, well, look, ZFC is a weak theory, and there's the true set theoretic reality out there, and we need a better theory because the current theory isn't answering the questions. Everything's independent. And so that seems like a quite reasonable thing to take. If you think that that every set theoretic question has a definite answer and there's a unique set theoretic truth or a unique fact of the matter, right? This is the universe view.
And by the way, to reiterate, independent means it cannot be proved or disproved within this axiomatic system, within this theory.
Right. Exactly. So to be independent means you can't prove it, and also you can't prove that it's false. You
And you
can't
were
refute
saying
it.
that's why the statement is so traumatic or sad, that most of the interesting stuff, as you said, has been shown to be independent
Right.
of ZFC.
But that's an interesting way to put it, I think, because it reminds me of this, when I was a graduate student in Berkeley, there was another graduate student who was working with a non-logic professor in C-star algebras or something like this. So it's a part of analysis or functional analysis. And they were looking at a question and it turned out to be independent of CFC, right? And the attitude of this other professor was that, oh, I guess I asked the wrong question. But my attitude and the attitude of all the set theorists was when you ask a question that turns out to be independent, then you asked exactly the right question because this is the one, it's carving nature at its joints. You're adjudicating the nature of set theoretic reality by finding these two realms. You find one of these dichotomies. There's the worlds where it's true and the worlds where it's false. And so when you ask that question, that's to be celebrated. It means you asked exactly the right, interesting, fascinating question. So it's not a kind of bleak thing that you can't prove it and you can't refute it, and that's such a disaster. Rather, it means that you found this cleavage in reality, in mathematical reality, and it's good to know about those when they happen.
Carving nature at its joints. So what can you do about the things that are shown to be independent from ZFC? So
Right.
what are the techniques?
So one thing is that because of the incompleteness theorem, we know that there's going to be, for any theory that we can write down, there's going to be things that we can't prove, true things we can't prove in it. So those things are going to be independent. And so we're already aware of the fact that there will always be these independence phenomenon for any theory that we write. And furthermore, some of those theories, we won't even be able to prove that they're consistent, like the consistency of the own theory. So that's called the consistency strength hierarchy. So it's a direct consequence of Gödel's second incompleteness theorem that for any theory we can write down, then towering over it is this incredibly tall tower of consistency strength, where the strength in theories aren't just adding another axiom, but they're adding another axiom even whose consistency was not provable in the previous layers of the hierarchy. And so how lucky we are to find the large cardinal axioms that instantiate exactly this feature of increasing consistency strength, this unending and extremely tall hierarchy of consistency strength of axioms. And it exactly fulfills the prediction that Gödel's theorem makes about that kind of thing, except that the axioms in the large cardinal hierarchy aren't, metalogical self-referential statements of the form that sometimes arise in the Gödel analysis, but rather they're professing existence of big infinities, these large cardinal axioms. And so it's such a welcome development. And yet, it's also known that the continuum hypothesis is independent of all of the known large cardinal axioms. So none of the large cardinal axioms we can prove, none of them can settle the continuum hypothesis. So the independence phenomenon is still there for things like the continuum hypothesis and the cardinal combinatorics that
So
I
you're
mentioned.
building this incredible hierarchy of axiomatic systems that are more powerful than the ZFC.
More powerful than ZFC, and then more powerful than that, more powerful than that, and so on. It keeps going forever, and it will never be finished.
And still, to this day, the continuum hypothesis is not.
It's not settled by any of the large cardinal axioms.
Wow. Wow. How does that make you feel? Is that, will it ever be settled?
Yeah, well, it's part of my multiverse view, I guess. So, which we started by, I was describing the universe view, which is the view that, look, there are facts of the matter about all of these questions, and that it will turn out, if you're a universe view person, which I'm not, but if you are, then you will hold that there is a right answer to the continuum hypothesis question, and there's a right answer to the large cardinal questions and so on, and that what we should be aiming to do is figure out this one true set theory. Okay. In contrast, I take the developments of set theory over the past half century or more as evidence that there isn't such a unique set theoretic reality. Rather, what we've been doing for decades now is producing more and more alternative set theoretic universes in which the fundamental truths are differing from one to the other, and that is the answer to the continuum hypothesis question. The fact that given any model of set theory, there's a forcing extension where the continuum hypothesis is true and another one where it's false. You can sort of turn it on and off like a light switch. And that's the fundamental nature of the continuum hypothesis, is that you can have it or you can have the negation as you like within a very closely related set theoretic world. Wherever you happen to be living, there's a closely related one where CH is true, where the continuum hypothesis is true, and one where it's false. And that itself is a kind of answer. It's not a singularist answer, a universe view answer. It's a pluralist answer. And this led me to my views on the multiverse view of set theory and pluralist truth, namely the fundamental nature of set theoretic truth has this plural character in that there isn't a singular meaning to the fundamental terms, but rather there's this choice of alternative set theoretic universes that have different truths.
So what does the multiverse view of mathematics enable you to do? What does it empower you to do, and what are the limitations? What are the things it breaks about mathematics as a field, as a space of knowledge, and what does it enable?
First of all, I guess one should say that these different philosophical positions that you might take in the philosophy of set theory, like the multiverse view or the universe view, we don't ever disagree about the mathematics. We're all agreeing on what the theorems are. It's a question of philosophical perspective on the underlying meaning or the context, or really, what is a philosophy of mathematics for, right? And I mean, if you look back in history, for example, like to the time of calculus with Newton and Leibniz, right? They famously developed the ideas of calculus using their concepts of infinitesimals and And those foundations were roundly mocked by Bishop Berkeley and so on, who talked about, what are these same evanescent increments, and shall we not call them the ghosts of departed quantities? But the foundations really were kind of completely suspect, I think, at the time, and the foundations of infinitesimal calculus really only became rigorous in the 1950s or so with the development of non-standard analysis and Robinson's work. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make is that, do you need a robust, rigorous foundation of mathematics to make enduring insights in mathematics? And the answer, regrettably, is apparently not, because in calculus, even with that lousy, creaky foundation of infinitesimals not even well understood that Newton and Leibniz had, they proved all the fundamental theorems of calculus, and they had all the main insights in those early days with that extremely bad foundation. And so that shows you something about the relevance of the kind of foundational views on mathematics and how important they are for mathematical developments and progress and insight. I mean, because I view those early mathematical developments in calculus as genuinely mathematical and extremely important and insightful, even though the foundations weren't any good from, by contemporary perspectives. Okay, so when it comes to the philosophy of set theory and the dispute between the universe view and the pluralism, my view is that the choice of the philosophical perspective doesn't actually have to do with the mathematical developments directly at all. Rather, it tells us, where should set theory go? What kind of set theory should we be looking at? What kind of questions should we be asking? So if you have a universe mentality, the universe view, then you're going to be pushed to try to find and articulate the nature of the one true set theoretic universe. And I think that remark is really well borne out by the developments with Hugh Woodin, who's one of the most prominent mathematicians and philosophers with the universe view and his theory of ultimate L and so on. And he's really striving.
Who was also your advisor.
He was also my supervisor. Yeah, my graduate supervisor.
Which is a personal story as well.
This fundamental dispute, on this question. But he is has a very strong and successful research program sort of trying to give legs to finding the nature of the one true set theoretic universe. And it's driving the questions that he's asking and the mathematical programs that he's pursuing. Whereas if you have a pluralist view, as I do, then you're going to be led and attracted to questions that have to do with the interaction of different set theoretic universes, or maybe you want to understand the nature of how are the models of set theory related to their forcing extensions and so on. And so this led to things that I call, say, set theoretic potentialism, where you think about a set theoretic universe in a potentialist way, not in the sense of potential infinity directly, because all of these universes have infinite sets inside them already, but they're potentialist in the sense that we could have more sets. The universe could be wider and taller and so on, by forcing or by extending upward. And so we want to understand the nature of this realm of set theoretic universes. And that's quite some exciting work. And so with Benedict Lowe and I, we proved some theorems on the modal logic of forcing and set theoretic potentialism under end extension. I've done a bunch of work on this topic. And also, I mounted, together with Günter Fuchs and Jonas Rietz, who was one of my own PhD students, the topic of set theoretic geology, which is studying, it's taking the metaphor of forcing. I mean, in forcing, you have the ground model and the forcing extension. And when I was first working with Jonas, he said, I want to undo forcing. I want to go backwards. And I, at first said, but Jonas, it doesn't work that way. You start in the model, in the ground model, and you go out, you go to the bigger one. That's how forcing works. And he said, no, I want to go backwards. And so he was quite persistent, actually. And so finally I said, okay, let's do it. Let's take it seriously. And so we sat down and started thinking, more precisely and carefully and deeply about the nature of taking a set theoretic universe and seeing where did it come from by forcing, which was a new way of thinking about forcing at the time.
Like reverse engineering the forcing?
Yeah, something like that. Forcing is a way of producing a new universe, and so you could start somewhere and go to that new universe, or you could look where you are and say, well, look, I got here by doing that already in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So we define models of the bedrock model and ground, sort of undoing the forcing. And really it was quite fruitful. And I view this as part of the sort of pluralist perspective, except the difference is that set theoretic geology is amenable to the universe view. So even though the work was inspired by this philosophical view on the multiverse view, nevertheless, the central ideas of geology have now been picked up by the people with the research program in the universe view, because it turns out that set theoretic geology is helping them or us to discover the nature of the one true universe relates to its mantle. There's this concept of the set theoretic mantle that I had introduced in a way that is extremely interesting. And so it's historically quite funny, I think, because this research program that grew entirely out of the pluralist point of view ended up being picked up by the universe point of view research program in a way that is quite important.
Can you prove something in the world that you arrived at through forcing and then take some of that back to the ground model?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really powerful argument method. Actually, people often want to do that. Suppose you're in some set theoretic context, you could think about it as living in a set theoretic universe, and you want to prove something in that universe only. But maybe one way to do it is to first construct this forcing extension and then use the features about this forcing extension to realize that certain things must have already been true in the ground model. And then you throw the forcing extensions away and
Oh, cool.
yeah. So this can happen. To pick a more elementary example, if you think about the early days of people reasoning with the complex numbers before they really understood them. So they would have these algebraic equations that they're trying to solve, and they would have the tools and methods of doing it. But then in the course of, so they would have to do things to the polynomial and change the factors and so on and produce other polynomials and solve them and so on. And sometimes they could produce solutions in the middle of their construction. They were led to like the square root of -5 or something, in the construction. And they didn't have any meaning for that, but they would just do it symbolically, and eventually it would turn in, because of the methods that they had, they would combine and they would cancel and so on, and all the complex parts would cancel out, and they'd end up with this, actual answer, 3 plus square root of 17 or whatever, and they could check it, and it worked. It was a solution of the original equation. And so it must have been bewildering to them because they would start with this question purely in the real numbers, an algebraic question, and they would march on their method and proceed through the land of nonsense, with these square roots of negative numbers, and then end up with an answer that was real again, that they could verify was correct. And so I view this kind of forcing argument that I was just describing in a similar way. You start in set theory and you go to this land of nonsense in the forcing extension, this imaginary world, and you argue and you come back. I mean, you make a consequence in the ground model. And it's such a beautiful way of arguing.